Welcome to User Insights, a podcast series powered by UXarmy.
Hi, Arvind. Thank you so much for joining our podcast today. And our podcast is called User Insights, and we're really glad to have you. Let me just start by giving a brief introduction. So, we have our esteemed guest, Arvind Chandrashekar, today with us, who will be the speaker for this podcast. Arvind is currently leading the charge at Lance as the Director of UX Research, and he has spent around 15 years in this domain and has made some significant strides in the world of user research and customer experience design. On to you, Arvind. Please give us.
Thank you for the lovely, succinct introduction. It is, I think, 17 years of research. Been a researcher since, I think, 2007 in some shape and form. It's my pleasure to sort of be invited and sort of have this conversation because I know one of the big pain points universally across all research functions, especially one that is product attuned, tends to have the general crucible that they need to carry, which is, defining their worth. And it's never a pleasant conversation when somebody puts you on a spot and says, what have you done? How has what you have done impacted the bottom line or the top line of the P&L? So happy to have this conversation. So
before we begin with it, let me just give an introduction to our listeners who are going to listen to this podcast later on. So the topic that we'll be discussing today is communicating ROI of UX research. So I feel in the recent times, there has been an increase in how organizations have, started recognizing the value of UX research. Then, of course, along with this comes the responsibility of articulating the return of investment as well. So it does remain a challenge to some of the UX researchers, like you mentioned, when you're, asked what impact your research or your work has brought to the business.
Yeah, it's a dual-edged sword in that sense. In the sense that while there has been familiarization and socialization of what user research brings to the table, there is an increased understanding of the value that it can provide. But unfortunately, I think since 22, with the great upheaval in tech industry overall, research has been one of those functions which has been impacted the most. And it's primarily in the sense because there is no tangible output, so to speak. And it's almost like an organizational knowledge bank that exists, which researchers are supposed to be both the curators and gatekeepers. Gatekeepers might be the strong word and probably the wrong one as well. But so we have been sort of vilified in some sense, but we also have been recognized for the impact when research is done right, and it's been socialized right. There is an audience out there well enough for them to recognize the intangible value that comes in. Not a lot of user research can actually be quantified until you're a quantitative researcher and you have been sort of dealing with, quantified behavior, so to speak, if your products have seen scale and there is an established A/B sort of testing framework and whatnot. But a lot of the quantitative and the easy to understand and easy to grasp metrics, that sort of work also sort of overlaps with the data analysts who exist within the company. So it's been a challenge and it's been exciting. It's like the Chinese proverb of saying we live in interesting times. And it is what it is. These are interesting times, and it's all about trying to make the best of what is given to us.
Yeah. So I think, like you mentioned, there's no tangible way of communicating, what your research has produced. Maybe like that's a benefit that some of the other teams might have, like a marketing team or a sales team, where they're able to show the numbers and, convey the benefit or the impact that they bring to business. So how do you think researchers can overcome this, and what are the strategies or what are ways that they can deploy to, effectively communicate the impact in some way to business stakeholders since we don't have numbers to show?
It all actually boils down to first principles and sort of doing systems thinking in that sense. Um, if you are struggling to sort of convey the value that you have been sort of providing, and you do want to be recognized for the value that you bring to the table, it's almost like the service aspect in a restaurant. You know, uh, you are in a restaurant. What you're really paying for is not just the food, but you're also sort of paying for the ambience, it's for the service, how friendly and courteous the serving staff have been. And all of these are not really quantified. You never really say, X% of my total bill is because of the time that the restaurant owner sort of spent time teaching and training the wait staff. You know, uh, Research at the end of the day is a cost center. We spend a lot of money in trying to find the right people to sort of have conversations, whether it's exploratory, generative, and evaluative. Uh, and there's a lot of times when the results do not really immediately manifest themselves. It does take a long time for the system itself to recognize saying this knowledge exists. How do we sort of leverage it? Everybody is sort of working in a very additive sense. It is a lot of product teams are essentially working as a feature factory. It's all about saying, if this feature is not working, what else can we do? It's not about subtractive approach of saying, if it's not working, let's find out what's not working. Let's remove the extra fluff that surrounds conversations and whatnot. So what I've been sort of telling my team for the longest time, and it's paying exponential dividends in a very compounding manner, is the fact that the research function behaves like a agency by itself, which is ensconced within the larger organization. So anybody who's coming in with the research request is treated like a client, is treated like a customer. So it is essential to sort of have those conversations saying, and I would sort of defer back to the analogy of being in a restaurant saying, if the wait staff does ask, saying, are you allergic to anything? You're not, as an Indian, you're not really used to being asked this question. So the moment somebody asks this, suddenly you're taking a step back and you're reevaluating in how you would evaluate the overall experience for that afternoon or evening. So it's all about being just humane to your internal stakeholders, first of all. And I know that there's a bigger narrative of user researchers being champions of what users want, but we also need like we also need to bridge the chasm and the bridge that exists between what the product and the dev team and the design team want and what the users are really saying. You are sort of playing the role of a translator, and you need to sort of understand and read the room, so to speak. And it is very seldom that I've found people to sort of understand the nuances involved Either it's a dog eat dog sort of an approach, where researchers are like, if I don't push what the users are asking for, irrespective of what is going to impact my internal stakeholders, KPIs, or the OKRs, um, you will end up being a collateral damage because you're not working in a collaborative manner. As a researcher, you are expected to build that bridge, which is why, I think sometime around the late 2010s and early 20, and where we are, there was an entire narrative about socializing research, about getting the product team and the design team to sort of participate in that research process. And that was a seed of it, to get in that collaborative process and not really be very judgmental, you know. Um, and it's not easy. I mean, the PMs have their own work. They are sort of managing up and managing down. They are sort of working in a cross-functional place. Designers seem to be doing the same thing. It's just researchers who seem to have this very envious place of saying, oh, this is what you guys are doing, but, this is not right because this is what we know what users have said, and you guys need to go back to square one, and it is not a collaborative place. And that's where the friction sort of comes in. And that's where the value of research, people tend to sort of question it with a very antagonistic stance, where saying, you're not really helping me. What is your value? Your value, and you can sort of calculate it in a very tangible plus intangible sort of whatever factors you want to put in. And it's a simple basic trick, but a lot of us seem to overlook it. So yeah, I'm not sure if I quite answered that question of yours, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I do have a lot of follow-up questions on that. So, one thing I feel like I have experienced is that you have to make your own place on the stakeholder or the business table. You have to be the voice of change. Nobody is gonna say that, okay, let's like bring the researcher in and ask them for their opinion. But it's only when you bring some value or add value to those meetings, people will start saying that, yeah, you have something important to say.
So this is a bit of a controversial hot take of sorts. You're not going to get invited to meetings if you're not providing value. Like if you're part of an organization which has a research team, clearly the organization recognizes the value of research. Now it's all about the effort that the researcher themselves are putting in and trying to sort of connect the dots, and not just being a vessel of what the users are saying. There needs to be a certain layer of insights where the researcher is trying to bridge the conflicting and contradictory parts that people are looking at. Users, at the end of the day, what all of us want is basically simple things, easy things, free things. We don't want to think, right? At the end of the day, that's all that we want. Product or the business needs to make money. Now, these are conflicting. As users, we don't want to pay money. Businesses want people to sort of spend money. Now, if you're not able to translate what the users are saying in a manner that the business team will sort of understand and try and go back to the drawing board and try and figure out how to best leverage without sort of causing extreme levels of friction and churn, you're not going to get invited to meetings. I mean, because you're not speaking the same language that the rest of the room is speaking.
What do you think is the, like you mentioned, right? If you don't speak the language, so what, in your opinion, is the right manner to communicate to the business stakeholders in their language what the users want, so that they also understand? And in your terms, like to bridge the gap between what the users want and what the business wants, to how to communicate it effectively.
every single team, or at least, the research team that I work with, we tend to sort of spend inordinate amount of time with engineers and the product team and design team, right? Um, and when there's research debriefings that happen, that's when the business and the stakeholders and the leadership teams are sort of involved for them to sort of understand how the products are overall sort of behaving, right? And how to sort of steer the ship in the right direction. Every single team that we sort of interact with, they have their own jargon. They have their own vernacular. You cannot be saying, we did this IDI or we did this consumer immersions with, or we sort of carried out this guerrilla ethnography and that's how we sort of arrived at these findings. These are very research jargon. It's a language that only
Right.
fellow researchers will understand and will have follow-up questions. Engineering, all they really want is find out performance issues and stability issues and, ANRs and whatnot, crash reports and whatnot. The product team is looking for retention, engagement, time spent, ad seen, number of ads seen, all of that, the entry point, the source point, all of those things. Now, if you're not spending enough time, it's a lot like context switching. It's a lot like how generally people behave when they're on their phone and they get into an auto. And this may sound classist, and because it most definitely is classist, is if you're speaking with somebody from office or one of your friends, you're most probably conversing in English. But but when you have to give directions to the auto driver, you're not conversing in English. You are context switching and you are using Hindi or whatever is the local language, right? And that's the sort of language context switching that needs to be present. You cannot be using your research language and saying, hey, listen, this is the sort of fallacy or this is the inherent bias that we've noticed, cognitive dissonance and whatever else. It's a fairly, you can actually take it as a rule of thumb saying 90% of the folks are not going to know what cognitive dissonance is, even though it's fairly popular. And this does get thrown around a fair bit in meetings and in calls and whatnot. But there's a lot of folks who have heard this, but have just not bothered to even Google. So if a researcher is not reading the room and sort of recognizing, saying, I'm speaking for so long, but nobody's really raising a question, I need to simplify things. Maybe people are not really understanding and nobody wants to speak up and come across as, nobody wants to be the one who says, emperor is not wearing any clothes, to go back to the parable. There are ways of communicating your value in terms of mapping your recommendations to the feature and the metrics that flow in, but that's a long term. That you tend to evaluate over a quarter, 6 months or over a year. You're not going to be able to sort of establish your value in over a life cycle of, say, 3 weeks. Over a life cycle of a particular project that you're running or a particular study that you're running. Everybody, the large majority of the organization is going to view saying, yeah, so they spoke to, few people and this is what they have to say. The value actually comes in when everybody else understands what you have come back with. They understand what are the minor tweaks that is needed, right? And if I have to use another example, is the fact that everybody sort of wonders why we need a coach for the Indian cricket team. Everybody's a great player. Everybody sort of come through different levels of competition. Everybody's a world-class player. What does the coach really do? Nobody knows, but the coach does help each of their the players to sort of understand the weaknesses and how they can sort of improve, what is expected of them, and sort of get the best out of the product and the team. A lot of the research work, and as the years have gone by, I've sort of come to the realization it's part HR, it's part leadership, it's part product ownership. You basically have to be a Renaissance man or a woman or whoever it. You cannot just be one hat, one size fits one sort of an approach. You literally have to be, a juggler of thought.
I think one common this thing that I have noticed while you're trying to communicate your findings to the other teams, be it the business team, product team, or engineering team, and during the debriefing calls is that when you bring out a strong point about something, there's always a follow-up question about how many people said this. How many people did we interview? How many people said this? So, say for example, if the sample size is 15 or 20, which is typically what we go with if it is qualitative research. So, how do you feel this can be overcome? What's the strategy that someone should deploy so that you don't get these questions like how many people
So
said
the moment anybody on any call or any debrief tends to raise a question of how many people you spoke with, that's the first red flag that people don't trust the process that you have followed, or you have exhibited the rigor that is required to carry out a research process. And this is the fastest way, because as researchers, we know for a fact that even if one single person has said something and it's an outlier statement, that oftentimes carries an insignificant weight, right? So you cannot sort of retort and say, it was just one person. The originating or the background behind the person raising this question is we've not really managed to convince the rigor of the research process so that it's unquestionable. That's one. And it's really difficult because when somebody feels threatened and you're saying, whatever you've done is not really right, and the person sort of recognizes that a lot of questions are going to get directed to them, this is one of their safety nets. One of the reasons as to why research has really struggled to make peace and sort of build this collaborative practice in-house is because one of the key responsibilities research needs to do is to be disruptive, is to challenge the status quo, because otherwise it's just an echo chamber. You may as well be sort of going ahead with a sample of one, which is whoever is the supreme boss, they want things to change, buttons to change from left to right because of whatever reason. That's how it is. Researchers are the ones who tend to sort of challenge and say, hold on a second, people tend to prefer things on the left or the right. Why are we sort of changing things? Like, what is the rationale or the reason behind it? And more often not, people will not have answers. It's the researcher's job is to ask questions. We get paid to ask questions. And as a result of it, if you're asking questions or you're sort of creating an environment where somebody else has to answer those questions or gets to be put in a spot, then they are going to get defensive. And which is why it's super critical for researchers to sort of do the due diligence and the homework to get people on board and say, this is the research, this is what we are going to do. And not really, and when findings and takeaways start coming in, you're not really waiting for the last moment of time to sort of drop a big bomb. You sort of keep coaching and hand-holding and saying, listen, these are early takeaways. We still have to spend time, but this is what we are beginning to hear. It's not great, right? When you sort of start doing this, almost timely, from time to time, you keep sharing these nuggets. You are sort of preparing whoever's going to be at the receiving end. You are sort of letting them know. You are giving them enough time to sort of prepare a safety net of themselves, for themselves, rather than putting you on the dock and making the entire room question saying, that's actually a good point. If just one person is saying, why should we even listen? It's because the internal stakeholder management is not being done right. We are not sort of managing up or, managing at all. The same way in terms of how we tend to sort of address the loudest voice in the room. If you're doing a dyad or a triad or a focus group and there is always a loudest voice, every single researcher has their own strategies in trying to sort of deal with it, right? And that sort of an approach we never bring to when we are sort of dealing with our own stakeholders. We always sort of say, okay, they must be right. We don't sort of put on that empathy hat on for our own stakeholders because we believe we are all part of the same team. But it's not. We are the ones who are actually spending money, and there are others who are sort of spending time to earn money. And they're two different things. It's a very parent-child sort of an approach. Love the kids, but when I look at the bills, I'm not really too happy. There are often times when I'm sort of questioning the decisions sort of I've taken in the past. So, like I said, controversial, but yeah, these are the sort of things that we generally tend to overlook. So,
And what would be like some suggestions from your side in how you represent your insights or the actionable that you want to convey to the other team members? Like, do you feel it's important to have some actionables when you're doing the debriefing call? Just so that
like if you're doing something and you're not coming back and saying, this is where we went wrong, or this is what we are doing right and we should be doing more of this, there's absolutely no value. Right? Like if you do research and you find out the formula for gravity and, the capital G and the small g and all of that thing, if people don't know how to use those formulas to solve their problems, the research is not worth it. You having prepared really well for an exam and you score 99 out of 100, all you really want to know is, where did I lose it? How do I get that single mark back? Right. How do I score, all the marks that there is? And if somebody says, you should work harder, or I don't think you spend enough time, it's not an actionable takeaway. You really want to know, where is that mistake that you seem to have done? Nobody wants generic gyan. Nobody wants to be taught the fundamentals of psychology. Nobody wants a master class to be given on an, office dime. Everybody just wants, just tell me what I need to do. Save me time. When I do find the time, I will come back and I will try and understand this better. So, yeah. The actionables is an absolute. Like if we are not doing that enough, we should. And I'm not really sure why even that conversation sort of begins when research comes in and says, this is what users are saying, and I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Then you're not really doing a researcher's job. What you're doing is basically being a transcriber. Or a translator of sorts, and there are enough AI tools now to do that. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So, like continuing on that, I mean, do you feel the art of storytelling plays an important part here in
Yeah.
communicating the ROI? Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you're not able to tell people why they should be doing something, like going back to the actionable insight bit, if you're not
Great.
able to underline why something is a P0 item on a priority matrix, from a user standpoint, and why it sort of makes sense for us to sort of act on it immediately, because it sort of impacts the retention and engagement and every other critical metric that we want to follow and chase. Um, I don't know how not to sort of convey that in a story form. Uh, Everybody sort of understands stories. Like we may not sort of remember textbooks and what page, what paragraph and what theory and what definition lies, but we can totally tell at which minute which song comes in a movie, or when an action movie, when an action scene is happening. We know the beats to the story. People are invested. Like if you're going to be very academic and say XYZ and, A plus B the whole square, yeah, like sure, people will listen to it because they are part of the conversation and they have nowhere to run. But are they really registering? I'm not sure. But if A is Shahrukh and B is Kajol, and whatever mathematical operant I want to use is Amrish Puri, and whatever else, suddenly everybody is in. Like everybody is like, hold on, go back. So why is, what is happening? There's a lot more engagement. There's a lot more personal stake. You're also allowing people to sort of project themselves as the user. You're helping when you're sort of using the right storytelling technique or the right narrative. What you're essentially doing is allowing your stakeholders to place themselves as the user, and then the questions sort of take a different nature altogether. Then the question is like, oh, that's interesting, but this is not what I do. This is interesting that others are doing this. Like, I didn't think of this. You're not really then. That's when even your outlier behavior sort of comes into the conversation. People are not really asking, saying, oh, so how many people did this? How many people? And like I said, I mean, the research rigor is part of that narrative and the storytelling as well. You cannot just say, listen, we spoke with 5 people, each of them said different things. And all I'm conveying is person A said this, person B said this, you guys decide what you guys want to do. Right? Until you're not able to stitch see the patterns, and to stitch them in a cohesive manner for anybody to sort of read any document or watch a recording of the debrief and say, I understood. I understood the story. I understood what the story was, why this story was made, all of those things. That's where the storytelling, really, really comes into being. It sort of helps others feel empathy. It sort of allows other people to walk in somebody else's shoe. So, yes, storytelling, huge.
And what according to you do you see as foresee as coming changes in the coming years when you're trying to communicate the ROI of research? How do you think
But
it's gonna change?
there's going to be a increasing amount of conversations where people are going to sort of switch to synthetic research, where they're going to believe that if I ask this question to an AI, LLM, yeah, it's giving me things and, whatever else, but there is going to be that challenge of um, educating folks in terms of what the constraints are with regards to synthetic research, when it should be used, when it should be encouraged, and when it should be discouraged. Um, everybody wants things to be sort of provided to them. Everybody wants to be born with a silver spoon. Nobody it's the principle of least effort. Nobody wants to sort of really work, you know. And one of the bits has been the fact that with platforms like yourself, whether UXarmy and others, where they are sort of trying to short circuit the time taken or the sort of costing component that is traditionally been associated with carrying out a research work, all of that is going to get challenged. Like nobody is going to spend a month or 2 weeks and wait for the research to come back and say, listen, out of these two options, neither of them work or one of them work. Right? Nobody's going to wait for 2 weeks. I mean, even within Glance and Mobi, we tend to run sprint cycles of 2 weeks. So if it's 2 weeks, I cannot sort of come back and say, hey, listen, the feature that's going to go live today doesn't really work. It needs to be rethought. That's where I am saying I'm not really valuable. I'm not really communicating anything. I need to have presented this before the sprint even started. And for that, a lot of that relationship building has to happen. A lot of the conversation has to happen. Research is people's business. I mean, whether we do it in a quantitative manner or in a qualitative manner, at the end of the day, we are dealing with people. And if we do not know how to deal with people and we do not know how to ask the right questions, irrespective of what the answer is, then we're not really being good at our job. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of those mindset is going to get challenged. There's going to be a lot of half-baked knowledge, which is going to sort of start propagating, where people are going to have misconceptions. The very concept of a research rigor may sort of also undergo change, and people are going to want things now. So, yeah, those are the big sort of, I think these are things that have already started to happen. I think the cost of doing research is also going to sort of drastically reduce. And yeah, and again, it's a dilemma of sorts, because the incentives that are supposed to be given to respondents is sort of always climbing because of inflation. So if we paid about 150 or $200 in 2000, mid 2000s, now we're paying about 1,000, 1,500, and in some cases, even about 5,000. And at the same time, the costing of the overall study has sort of not really seen that hockey stick sort of J curve, So there's going to be some level of correction that's going to happen, whether it's in terms of us finding a broader recruitment pool of users where the cost of incentive sort of is taken care of and doesn't really impact much, because the tech is it's a one-time costing. It's the ops that is a recurrent one. And I think there's going to be a whole bunch of conversations which are going to happen with regards to rationalizing the ops cost. And I love ops people. Like I've huge amount of respect, and they sort of tend to make a researcher's life incredibly easy when they like the researcher and incredibly difficult when they don't. And I genuinely, irrespective of whether they like me or not, I genuinely appreciate and respect the work that the ops guys do. But there is going to be um, a sea of change in how research ops is carried out, not so much on the research front itself, but I think the ops is going to see a whole bunch of change. Yeah.
Any closing notes, Arvind, that you would want to share with us on this topic, on this
Not here. Apart from that singular fact of your stakeholders are your users too. I mean, you as a researcher, you are a product owner in some sense. And you are dealing with a to-win or a double-sided marketplace. Stakeholders is one end and users are on the other. You cannot be indexing on one side. If you do, the marketplace collapses. You have to find the synergy and the harmony in this double-sided marketplace. And the sooner everybody does this collectively, the easier the conversations get. And then we do not have to have conversations where we are struggling to say, why am I valuable and how much is my value to the company and to the org? Nobody sort of questions how valuable, your fridge is. Nobody sort of questions how valuable a microwave is. Yes, there is a cost attached to it, but once you start using it, you cannot imagine life without a fridge or a microwave. Nobody questions saying, do we need a fridge? We go for a cheaper one. Everybody seems to go for a more expensive one with more features and whatnot. Right? Nobody questions the value or the ROI. Everybody says, yeah, I'm paying X amount, X thousand amount for a fridge or a microwave. And if it works for 2-3 years, I'm good. If it more than that, lovely, right? It's the same thing for research as well. It's just that we have just been really poor in sort of dealing with the double-sidedness of the marketplace. And yeah, those would be my thing. So, and that's where I would like to end the note.
Thank you so much, Arvind. It was lovely speaking with you. I feel anybody who's going to listen to this later on, there's a lot that they'll, get to register, and there are a lot of insights. Somebody who's new will know, early in their career how to sort of balance between stakeholders and users. So thank you once again. It was lovely speaking with you. Great conversation. I hope you have an amazing weekend coming forward.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of User Insights. We hope you gained valuable insights from our conversation.